there's this third question that we're asking. What are the historical structures for the growth of the church? Mission partly is a matter of structure. There are different words that we could use. Strategy is partly a matter of strategy, of methodology, of approach. We understand that the salvation is of the Lord. We understand that the advancement, the building of the church, that's the Lord's work. We understand that missions, it is the Lord's work. If the Lord does not favor it and bless it, then nothing happens. There's no fruit. And yet, we do, when we do missions, we use methods, we use strategies, we employ structures. And there's always been the case down through the history of the church. Some have thought about structures as patterns of relationship. These patterns and these relationships, sometimes officially established and sanctioned by the recognized church, other times more informally constituted. You think about in Wesley's day and the state church and the formality of all of that and the formal approval of everything related to that and the problem that they had with these Methodist preachers who were outside of that structure and just going out and preaching without the imprimatur, without the stamp of approval of the Church of England. And so there you have kind of the formal versus the informal. A number of years ago, Ralph Winter, missiologist, wrote a small, short article entitled "The Two Structures of God's Redemptive Mission." And he set out a thesis around two terms. And those two terms are modality and sodality. And he said as we look down through, he argued that as we look through the history of the church and the history of the practice of missions, that we can pretty much organize or categorize the various methodologies, approaches, structures under one of these two heads. Now, rather than trying to give you an essential definition of each of these, let me see if I can just sort of illustrate. And so, by using some characteristics. So a modality would be a structure that perhaps would be formal versus informal. All right? Another way we might think of this, a modality would be a structure that would be mainstream. That is, an accepted structure within the church program, the church. This is mainstream versus a peripheral, something out on the periphery. Let's see, what are some other terms that I might use here to distinguish modality from sodality? How about help me think of some terms. My mind's suddenly gone blank. Temporary versus permanent. I think we could do something with that. Permanent versus temporary. Here's another one. Here's another way to think about this. Old versus new. Yeah. Are you beginning to get the idea of the distinction between these two? These are the ways we've always done things. In other words, kind of the accepted traditional. Yeah. Traditional structures versus non-traditional. Kind of get the idea, the distinction between modalities and sodalities? Okay. Now, I'm going to take these off the board. But keep this distinction in mind. And then I want to ask you a question. I want you to brainstorm with me just a bit. What I want you to do is call out to me different structures that have been employed by the church down through the centuries in the practice of missions. We'll probably be a little slow out of the gate, but once you begin to get this, I got a stream of thought, this is just going to flow. Trust me, I've done this enough times. So different types of structures. And just call them out. You don't have to raise your hand, don't have to ask for permission to speak, but just call out some of these structures. Give it a shot. Come on. Denominations. We're going to start over here. Denominations. Okay. What are some other structures? Any kind of structure. Local church. Church. Pardon me? Okay, parachurch. Hey, there's an, in more contemporary terms, modality versus sodality. A church-related structure versus a parachurch organization. There's the distinction again. So, parachurch groups. Pardon me? Monasteries. Wow. Interesting. Who said monasteries? So, what are you thinking when you say monasteries? Why would you include this in a conversation about missions, the advancement of the church? I think it's legitimate. I'm glad you mentioned it. I'm asking, trying to pick your brain a little bit. Why? Okay, so people would go to monasteries to sort of separate themselves out in dedication to God, service to God. Okay. We were talking about this during the break. Now, this is a kind of a uniquely Roman Catholic perspective, isn't it? The monasteries, the nunneries, and such. And again, we're not talking about evangelical Christianity alone here. We're talking about broad Christendom, okay? Just keep that in mind. And so, think about the monasteries. What gave rise to the first monasteries, perhaps? A discontentment with the church, the status quo. Look at the clergy, the priests. They're corrupt. They are dishonest. They are not living as they should. The church here in this city is far from the ideal, and there might be a handful of folks who have given up, maybe even monks who have given up on that particular local expression and say, hey, we're going to go start over again. And so they go out into the wilderness and maybe an unpopulated area, you know, and we're going to do it right this time. And so they go and they build a monastery, they build places to live. Of course, they have to eat, don't they? So they grow crops. They are craftsmen and artisans, and so they begin to produce various types of goods. And these folks, they're really good at this. I mean, they're dedicated, they're hard workers, they're diligent. They produce way more than they can consume by themselves. So what happens? They get into the buying and selling business, trading. And before long, people realize, hey, we can go over there and we can buy such and such of great quality. And so suddenly these trading centers begin to grow up around these monasteries. And the population comes in and it begins to grow into a town, into a city. In fact, a lot of the, as far as I can tell, a lot of the cities, modern cities and towns in Europe owe their origins to early monasteries and the population centers that kind of grew up around them. Well, and so the work is established there, but it might be a number of years until someone else becomes dissatisfied and thinks, wow, we're off base again. And so what do? A handful of them do what? Go out and start another one. and somewhere out there. Now, this is not intentional missions as we tend to think of missions as Southern Baptists, as evangelicals. But we're not really so much talking about missions right now in the contemporary sense in which we think of them. We're simply talking about the advancement of the church. And this here we are talking about the Roman Catholic Church. And so the Roman Catholic Church in many places advanced through the monasteries, didn't it? Yeah. Pardon me? Oh, yeah, they did send out. And Patrick went up to Scotland, or Ireland, I guess, Ireland, not Scotland. And, I mean, there were missionaries who were sent out to the British Isles and into Germany. Yeah, so there was an intention. In fact, this is another type of structure. We happen to be talking about monasteries. How would you label this structure? Intentional sending or something like that? Yeah. Pardon me? Itinerant monks? Sure, why not? Itinerant monks. You know, the problem with being recorded and writing up here on the board, if I misspell something, it's there for posterity. So you guys correct me if I misspell something. What are some other structures that we can think of? Oh, there are many more. Missions boards. Yeah, boards. I'm just going to put up here boards. Kind of similar to boards, societies. The distinction here, we typically think of a board as a denominational board. It is tied in with, it is under the authority of a denomination. A society generally would be a kind of a standalone autonomous group. Now, it might very intentionally connect itself with a church or a group of churches for accountability or for support or whatever, but usually a little more autonomous and separate from a denominational board. Okay, so these are structures. What are some others? Educational structures. See, we're getting it now. Educational structures, such as, go ahead. Oh, sports. Yeah, athletic structure, sports. We had a couple go out of Southern Seminary, Billy Graham School, several years ago. They went to Egypt, and they went on a sports platform. They were organizing soccer leagues. They had received an invitation to come, and that was their platform for being in the country of Egypt. Sports, yeah. Business is mission, all kinds of business. Yeah, business structures. Yeah. Oh, yeah, kind of the circuit riders. Yeah, can I put up circuit riders? Yeah. In fact, in the early church, if you read some of the historical materials, you had these bands of itinerant preachers. Yeah. So, yeah, same sort. A little bit different. The circuit riders, we probably ought to put up their itinerant preachers. That's a little bit. The circuit riders typically would be, I think, you have 3 or 4 small congregations, and there is no pastor. This guy serves as pastor of all 4. And so he rides the circuit. And one Sunday out of each month, he'll preach at one of the churches. And so he's really kind of an itinerant pastor. But we're also beginning to talk about itinerant evangelists, preachers, just going out and preaching. Yeah. So there's a structure. What are some others? Pardon me? Government. Government? Why would we put government up here? They have a big effect. Can we say more than that? You have the state churches and the advancement of state churches. Yeah. The imposition of, pardon me? Absolutely. Yeah. I think I heard another thing or two here. What else? Oh, there's still plenty. Media. You said electronic media. Okay, let's talk about a very broad category. Let's just put up here media, okay? And so what, if we were doing some subpoints here, what might we list under media? Radio, what was it, HCFN or something like that. The first missionary radio, we're going to talk about it later, but anyways, first missionary radio, it was in South America. And the gospel was taken in, I believe it was Ecuador, but on the radio waves. And so you've got radio, you got TV, what else? Social media, the internet today. Pardon? Books, newspapers, yeah, all kinds of media. Music. Yeah. There has to be. We have a couple of guys. They've graduated from Southern now. One of these men, he owned a business which had international factories around the world. And he sold the business, came to Southern, sold the business. I'm sure he made out pretty well. And but he had a 10-year visa into Saudi Arabia. We'll come back to that. The internet, yeah. I know one story of a young lady in Northwest India who heard the gospel over the internet and was saved. Yeah. So the internet, media. Other. Pardon me? Aviation programs. Yeah, in fact, if we were to put this under a broad category, what might we list it as? Transportation? Could we do that? Yeah. Just transportation? And here, now we're beginning to talk about not just aviation, Missionary Aviation Fellowship, for instance, which very explicitly and directly is involved in missions, but just travel, modern travel. We can get places that our parents and grandparents could not get. And then you talk about road systems, and we could go on and on. Transportation, yeah. What are some other? Chaplaincy, yeah. The chaplaincy, this is a, yeah. We have had young men go out of Southern Seminary into chaplaincy positions with U.S. military who have had very fruitful ministries. Yeah. What are some others here? Pardon me? Relief organizations. Sometimes we will categorize very broadly all of this under mercy ministries. Okay? Will that work? Mercy ministries. So relief work, disaster relief, community development, food programs. We could just go on and on. What are some others? We're not going to just drag this out and out and out, but there's some others that I think we probably want to mention. Tracts, yeah. Now we're kind of, yeah, these are some of those subheadings I asked for a moment ago. Tracts, yeah. Bible translation, yeah. I'd like to put that up there, Bible translation. Medical, yeah, I was wondering if we were going to get to medical. where Southern Baptist missionaries have gone historically. We have built clinics, we built hospitals. In Indonesia, there are 3 big hospitals, one in Lampung, one in Kediri, and the other up in central Sumatra. I forget the name of the place. But we've built hospitals and clinics. And in Ghana, up in Nakpanduri, there is the big hospital, regional hospital there, built by Southern Baptist. So yeah, medical structures. What else? Anything else we want to add up here? Seminaries. And we could put that, it wouldn't be a bad thing, I think, to single that out. But we could list that simply under educational training, educational structures, training structures. But seminary, I'm just going to sit here now. But seminaries, Bible colleges, that sort of thing. Pastor schools, that sort of thing, yeah. What else? Pardon me? Yes, or we could put that under mercy ministries, but we might want to separate it out, just to make sure that we're distinguishing it. Yeah, orphanages. And maybe today we could talk about college ministries, student ministries. We've not listed that up here yet. Okay, but there are associations of Baptist churches that do this, and so it falls kind of within a denominational structure. But you're right, many of the campus groups are more parachurch. Yeah. Anything else you want to throw up here? Pardon me? Oh yeah, a mass big tent evangelistic crusades. Yeah, think Billy Graham. Children's ministries. I would be glad to, if I wasn't so lazy and I was still walking around, I'd put that up there also. Good. What else? You have just another moment or two here. It's kind of a going, gone situation. Keep looking at me. Don't open your computers yet. Don't look at your notes just yet. Now, what I've done is, in your outline, I did this just off the top of my head. I listed some things, some structures. I didn't mean for this to be exhaustive in any way or comprehensive, just kind of some seed thoughts, kind of get the conversation going. Keep looking at me, and so we've gotten a lot of these: congregation or the church, house churches, particular type, or missionary band. These are those itinerant preachers of the early church that would go around and preach. Orders, monasteries, nunneries, orders of various types, missionary societies, denominational boards. I have just here institutions of all types. That's kind of a catch. Here's one for you. How about physical structures? How about buildings themselves? Perhaps we're assuming this when we talk about you build a clinic. We're thinking a physical structure that houses the clinic, and you're able to store medicines there and do medical examinations and minor surgery. Hospitals, obviously, you have a structure. But I listed buildings. What about church buildings? Are church buildings important? Yeah. Did you know that our Southern Baptist International Mission Board has, for a number of years, been out of the church building business? Policy is that we do not build church buildings, nor do we fund the building of church buildings. Why would that be a policy? Well, even more basic than that, of course, the church is not the building, it's the people. But yeah, you can end up building a church, and look, folks, we're wealthy. By the world standards, we are wealthy as can be. And if we go in and build a church based on what we can do, in many places around the world, there's no way that the people themselves then can maintain the buildings. And not only that, but the focus it can very well begin to be on the building rather than the church. We see this with seminaries. I could name some locations around the world in which we went in years ago and built big, beautiful seminary campuses, which ended up in later years were not all that effective. What you ended up doing is you're pulling people out of a large geographical area and a large population, and you're requiring them to come to this city, to this beautiful campus, and they're coming out of these villages where they don't have anything, and they come to the city and they come to this campus and they experience things they've never experienced. They have things that they've never had, and wow, they want to stay. And not only that, the churches there and the leadership, well, that beautiful camp, that becomes a jewel that has to be maintained at all costs. And so these can almost become money pits, and we miss the focus on the work itself. That's not the case, and that's not so in every case. And I need to be careful that I don't paint with too broad of a brush here, but certainly possible. But I think about church buildings. A number of years ago, my family and I cashed in some I travel a lot, and cashed in some Sky Miles and some hotel points, and we spent about 10 days down in Mexico. And we drove up into the central mountains of Mexico, and we would drive through these little villages. And there was a commonality, a common factor that we experienced, that we saw in seemingly every village. What was it that we saw in seemingly every village? What? Pardon me? A cathedral, Roman Catholic cathedral, or church building. And it was often right there at the center of the village. The town was built up around it. Often there was a plaza of sorts, and this was the meeting place. It was not just for the Mass, the Eucharist, and all those religious, all that religious stuff, but this was the center of the town. And there was that church building standing there. We do need to understand, we need to emphasize that the church is not the building. Sometimes we struggle with this. We want to maintain buildings rather than doing the work of the ministry. It's a temptation all over the world. We're all human. So we must be careful. But I'm going to tell you, it just seems to me that there is something about that physical structure standing there. It almost screams to everybody, we are here. Does that make sense? And I think there's something to be said for that. And, after all, a building is not intrinsically evil. We live in buildings. We're meeting in a building, very beautiful building, comfortable building. We'll go home this evening, tonight, and we'll sleep in buildings. Sunday morning, we'll get up and we will gather in buildings and worship. We like our buildings. And there's a reason for that. They are useful. They're productive. They're good things. But we can get so caught up on buildings that we miss the weightier things of the ministry. And yet the building itself can be a structure that is, Tuesday evening I was down in the city just a couple of nights ago with a small local Southern Baptist congregation, and they do a monthly Tuesday, every fourth Tuesday evening, they do not a food closet, but a food pantry sort of, and they have boxes of food, and the community comes in, and so we sat around and we talked with some of the folks in the community. I asked a couple of families. I introduced myself and asked them if I could. Hey, I'd love to come see where you live. Where you live close by? Yeah, right down here. I'd love to visit with you sometime. Could I do that? And I asked two families. I said, yes, I plan to do that. But it was the building that in many ways made this possible. There was a gathering place, a place to store food, a place to put a freezer to keep the meats frozen until packages of meat until they were placed in the food boxes and stuff, you see. So physical buildings themselves become structures that can be used. Theological structures. Here I'm thinking perhaps of confessions and creeds, statements of faith, which are used to promote the faith. Strategies for recruitment, the appointment process itself, ordination perhaps, government. I have one here that nobody mentioned. How about the military? Military structures. Why in the world would I jot that down? Pardon me? Well, when I jotted, I wasn't thinking of the Crusades, but certainly historically, that was an attempt to use the military to recover the Holy Lands, to advance Christendom and such. Yeah, the two go hand in hand. Of course, we have hospital chaplains and biz corporate chaplains, but I was thinking military too when I put this up here. But now I'm not talking here. When I jotted down military, I wrote down military forces. I'm not thinking merely an armed force that houses the office of chaplain. I'm talking about a military force that does battle, that goes to war. Why would I list that here? And having gone there, then other people can go there. We need to throw out a disclaimer pretty quickly here, don't we? I don't think any of us, certainly not I. I'm not trying to promote the military as a missions strategy. Are you familiar with the 3 M's of missions work throughout history? Anyone ever heard of this, the 3 M's? This is interesting. And you can see, particularly during the colonial period of missions, last couple hundred years or so, you can look all around the world and you can see a pattern. It varies from place to place, but generally there's this pattern. Into a new area and into a new territory goes the military. The military goes in there to soften the people up, to conquer, to do battle, to wage war and to conquer the people. Absolutely. To gain colonial territory, new territory for the colonial power. The military is followed by whom, generally? Merchants. In fact, even the military excursions are generally done for what purpose? What's the old adage? We use it all the time. Follow the money. Follow the money. We can follow the money here. Why did the Spanish and the Portuguese go into South and Central America in such force? What were they looking for? Gold, silver. Why did the Spanish and the Portuguese and the Dutch go into the East Indies and war against one another for the control? For the spices. But the spices brought money. Why did the colonial powers, why did they go into West Africa? For the slaves. Money. Again, I'm not condoning any of this, certainly not slavery, but I'm just saying historically, even military excursions are often, I would even argue, typically done for the sake of profit. Often that's the case. Now there are just wars, there are just causes, and I don't deny that at all. But and then followed by whom? Missionaries. Think of a situation like William Carey. Went into India, went into Delhi. Dr. John Thomas was appointed by the Baptist Missionary Society to go along with William Carey and his family. John Thomas was sort of the treasurer. He handled the money that was given to them, to the team by the Baptist Missionary Society in England to get them through their first year. Thomas squandered all of that, blew it, and very quickly, suddenly William Carey and the work there was without funding, without financial support. What did William Carey do? Went to work, found work. He served at one time as manager of an indigo factory. He became a botanist. He did. After a while, he began to translate for the British government agencies who were there in the military. He went to work in order to support himself and the work. Why was he able to do that? It's because the British military and the British merchants were. Where did he find his work? Amongst the British. Now again, this is not an advertisement for, it certainly is not a commendation of much that we see in the colonial period. But we do often see that where the military goes, no one else would go until the military does go. Think about what would be a more modern, more contemporary example? Iraq? Yeah. Some of you are not really old enough to remember this, but it's pretty recent history. And there was not much being done in Iraq and missions work at all. The U.S. Military went in there under President George Bush, and after 9/11, and that whole country opened up. Suddenly, missionaries and resources were pouring into Iraq like crazy. Now again, the military didn't go in there to open Iraq up for the gospel. And so this was not intentional in any way. We're simply acknowledging that historically there have been cases in which the military has gone in and opened areas up so that missionaries can go in. Does that make sense? And we can acknowledge these things without condoning every military excursion or every colonial injustice. It's simply the case. Give you one more shot at this. Any other types of structures or specific structures you want to add to our list? And then I want to close this out with something. Anything else that we've not thought of? It's a pretty good comprehensive list, I think. We all stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before us. Absolutely, and we learn from their mistakes, but we're also encouraged by, and we also learn from their victories. Yeah, okay. Absolutely, we have to throw family up here. Yeah, how did we miss that? Yeah. Okay, anything else? All right, there's a big takeaway here, and I think it's very important. This is what Ralph Winter's article, and the modalities versus sodalities. By the way, many sodalities sodalities sometimes tend to evolve into and morph into modalities. That is, that which was once new is now old. That which was once out on the periphery is now mainstream. Yeah. That which was parachurch and we railed against it, now it's accepted. Again, many of you are not old enough to remember this, but I remember especially in the 70s and into the early 80s, there was this heated debate about parachurch organizations. And name some well-known parachurch organizations. Just name some. Pardon me? Cru? Pardon me? FCA, yeah, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Navigators. There are many others that we could name. And so the argument was that these are parachurch organizations. They're not legitimate. They are usurping the ministry and the responsibilities of the church. They are doing what the church ought to be doing. Well, yeah. And of course, those who were in favor of the parachurch organizations, they would say, you just cut your own throat. Exactly. The church is not doing it. The churches are not doing it, so we must do it. Well, there was this heated debate, it just raged about the legitimacy of parachurch organizations. I don't hear that debate much anymore. And many of the what were previously seen as parachurch are now just kind of accepted as part of the landscape. Crew, Navigators, FCA. I mean, these are just part of the work, you see. Well, here's the big takeaway for Ralph Winter. He argued that we need to study history. We need to look at these structures because the danger for us, particularly in missions, is that we will become locked into any one structure and cut ourselves off from even the possibility of innovation. And I would want to add biblical innovation. Anything that we do, any structure that we employ, any methodology or strategy needs to be tested in light of Scripture, needs to be consistent with biblical witness, biblical principles. But I think this is a legitimate lesson for us. If you have ever served as a pastor in a very traditional situation, or if one day you will find yourself doing so, and you come up with a bright idea, a new type of new ministry, or ministry to a new group of folks, or just something new, and somebody catches you after church one Sunday and says, "Preacher, we've never done it that way before." What has just happened there? Pardon me? Yeah, it just locked. I mean, locked into one way of doing it, tradition. We've never done it that way before. Well, maybe the way we've done it was not very good, and maybe it wasn't even very biblical. In other words, the fact that something is old does not mean that it's good, any more than because something is new and fresh means that it is good. And we can get locked into tradition. Well, this is just the way we've always done it. Well, it might not be working, and might not really be all that biblical. But this is the way we've always done it. We can't do it any other way. This is the danger that Ralph Winter sees, and he warns us about, particularly in missions, when we begin to bump up against all this new stuff, all these challenges of the different religions that are out there, the different worldviews, the cultures, just the geographical and climactic context that we find ourselves in. Wow, it is a different ball game. And we might not be able to do things exactly as we did them in that little county seat First Baptist Church. We can possibly then find ourselves locked into a single way of doing things and thereby cut ourselves off from even the possibility of biblical, good, solid biblical innovation. I don't think we want to find ourselves there. We don't want to chase after every new fad that's coming down the pike. And again, just because something is new doesn't mean that it's good. Just because something's old doesn't mean that it's bad. We sort of need to be like the Bereans, don't we? And test everything by Scripture. And we're going to do some of that toward the end of the semester as we begin to talk about some methods and strategies and approaches. So, structures. Yeah, structures for missions.